Bonjour, good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee for the opportunity to be here in Paris. It's a great honor for me to share with you an extract of my research on trade in the Gulf in the first millennium BC. Contacts between the island of Bahrain and the Oman Peninsula have been a constant since at least the third millennium BC. Mesopotamian textual sources referred indirectly to these connections. However, it appears that the trade ceased around the middle of the second millennium BC. Nevertheless, archaeological finds show that the exchange continued throughout antiquity. This is particularly interesting and significant as Bahrain logged raw materials such as soft stone and metal, while the nearby peninsula of Oman had some of the resources that the island required. In this study, we will investigate the exchange between the Oman Peninsula and the island of Bahrain during the Iron Age. To do this, I propose to categorize the data based on raw materials or specific types of objects to better understand the extent of this exchange. Copper, weapons or weaponry, soft stone vessels, and some examples of pottery. Let's start with the copper. Copper from Magan was exported to Dilmun during the third millennium BC. Consequently, copper or bronze artifacts found at Bahraini sites must be being made from imported metal. Pierre Lombard was of the opinion that Omani copper metallurgy was still very much alive in the Iron Age. The only analysis of Iron Age copper from Bahrain was carried out on sample 519 BKY in the German Mining Museum. The results, which follow the conclusions of Andreas Hoffmann, show a high nickel and arsenic content, which Hoffmann associated with the characteristic impurities of copper from Al-Hajar mountains. The raw material for this sample could therefore have been imported from the Oman Peninsula. As there are no natural copper deposits on Oman Peninsula, or in Bahrain, it is logical to assume that most of the metal was sourced from the Oman Peninsula due to the proximity of the two regions and the previous contacts. Almost 60 kilo of copper ingots were found in An-Nasiriyya, Bahrain. In addition, a copper workshop with molds, crucible, and molten metals was uncovered at a late third millennium BC level in Khalat al-Bahrain. These finds indicate that Bahrain produced its own tools and weapons from imported metal in the late third and early second millennium BC. Can this scenario be applied to the Iron Age? It is to be defined. Weaponry. Bahrain was dependent on external sources for its supply of metal. It is noteworthy, however, that there are few typological parallels between weapons from Bahrain and the Oman Peninsula. Two main categories of weapons can be distinguished in Bahrain, mainly arrowheads and daggers. According to Serge Clousieux, several copper arrowheads documented in the tombs of Al-Hajar are identical to these found in Al-Qusais and Karbin Saud in the UAE. With regard to the necropolis sector 1 of Al-Hajar, Pierre Lombard notes that the typology of bronze arrowheads number 126, C and D of Tom 2, and number 127, G and H, Tom 9, as listed in this catalog, is well represented on the Oman Peninsula. Arrowheads number 126, C and D, in particular, have a rhomboid or slightly rolly circular cross-section. Arrowheads number 127, G and H, have a prominent central rib or a leaf-like functional part. In Tel Abrak, an arrowhead, TA 587, with parallels was found in Tom 9 from Al-Hajar section 1. from Bahrain. It is an arrowhead with a blunt tip and a slightly pronounced rib. Daggers typically have crescent-shaped pommels in this area, a specialty of Oman artisans, as Pierre Lombard and Nadine Boxmati Fatouh report. There are several examples of such weapons in Bahrain, all dating to the first half of the first millennium BC, and used as grave goods in necropolis on the island. These examples are similar to those found in Oman and other places, such as Iran, which in turn show a clear link to Iranian molds. Can we conclude that the weapons from the Omani and Bahrain peninsulas followed the same trends observed through the region? This type of vessels are very common in the necropolis of Bahrain, although it is also found in domestic contexts in Kalat al-Bahrain, for example. Its frequency in all periods of ancient Dilmun is striking, especially considering that the island lacks the raw material required to make these vessels. Therefore, at least the raw material had to be imported. Given the trade and economic relations between Bahrain and Oman Peninsula, it is reasonable to assume that the latter was the main supplier of soft stone. According to Pierre Lombard, also, most of the typologies discovered in the Oman Peninsula can be also found in Bahrain. But does this mean that the old soft stone found in Bahrain come from the Oman Peninsula? This question is difficult to answer. In this context, reference should be made to a study by Flemming Hoslund and Helmut Andersen from the 1970s, in which the results of provenance analysis of 20 softstone samples from Kalat al-Bahrain were presented. The results were conclusive. The raw material came from the Oman Peninsula, which ruled out Iran as a possible source. In the absence of additional geochemical analysis, we must rely solely on typology and decoration to identify pieces that were made in Oman and exported as finished products. However, this method would not be applicable in the hypothetical scenario that the raw material was transported in large quantities to Bahrain to be manufactured there. Scholars such as Pierre Lombard, Flemming Hoslund, and Helmut Andersen have suggested that these vessels were probably imported as finished products, presumably from the Oman Peninsula. To support this hypothesis, parallels in form and decoration can be analyzed. In the necropolis of Al-Hayyar, for example, in Bahrain, objects made of soapstone were found in several tombs. Of particular interest are tombs 3, 6, 7, and 9, which can be safely dated to the Cold Assyrian period. In fact, the soapstone fragment TA21 from Tel Abrak in the UAE is almost identical to one found in the above-mentioned Tomb 3 in Al-Hayyar, differing only in the number of parallel zigzag lines. The example from Bahrain has 6. In his dissertation, Pierre Lombard compiled a catalogue of the soapstone pieces found in Bahrain. According to this analysis, most of the typologies discovered on the Oman Peninsula can also be found in Bahrain, including flat-bottom bowls with white walls, number 98 and 99, molded vessels, number 100, 101, cylindrical vessels, truncated conical vessels, biconical vessels, pyxis, and barrel-shaped vessels. The examples of pottery found of imported pottery or those with parallels that establish a link between Bahrain and the Oman Peninsula are limited. Pseudo-barbar pottery may have been exported from Iran, although not in significant quantities. This type was primarily intended for local consumption on the island and consists of lightweight beige ware, sometimes with cream-colored slip. The shapes are varied and include vertical necks, spherical shapes, and hole in the mouth, and carinated profiles. In addition, some notable examples deserve mention. Bridge-spouted vessels found in Bahrain, dated to the Iron Age too, have exact parallels in fabric and decoration on the Oman Peninsula, where they are well documented. In this context, Jacques Clousieu pointed out the abundance of such ceramics in the tombs of the necropolis of Al-Hajar. According to Pierre Lombard, at least two types of pottery of Omani origin have been documented in Bahrain: black painted pottery on redware and incised gray pottery. The black painted pottery on redware has a limited distribution. The most common form being a small teapot with a globular body, spout, occasional side handle, and foot. All these pieces in this category have a light-colored reddish beige paste ware that is relatively fine and occasionally slipped. The decoration consists of vivid red and reddish brown color with motifs such as circles with dots, meanders, spirals, stars, crosses, or comb patterns. As far as the incised gray pottery is concerned, there is a striking parallel between the gray pottery from Kalat al-Bahrain and the soft stone vessels from Rumeila, for example, of the first millennium BC. Similarly, Munir Taha pointed out the strong similarities between the material from Al-Qusais and the sites in Bahrain. In the necropolis of Al-Hajar, mainly ceramic bowls and casting vessels made of beige and gray clay pastes were found. According to Taha, some of them also feature slip or geometric motif painted in light red on a beige or light red background. However, no images of this example have been found. To summarize, Magan and Dilmun maintained excellent relations during the Iron Age. The lack of raw materials on the island of Bahrain probably forced the inhabitants to look to the Oman Peninsula to obtain a large proportion of the materials they needed. However, this not necessarily mean that the Oman Peninsula was the only supplier. Nevertheless, the supply of copper from the Omani mountains must have been of crucial importance, as was that of softstone. Ancient Magan had some of the most important resources for the development of Gulf societies in antiquity. In this context, we take up Pierre Lombard and Nadine Borgmati-Fatou a section about the absence of Bahraini materials in the archaeological sites on the Oman Peninsula, which stand in stark contrast to the abundant material imported from Bahrain during the same period. If ancient Dilmun lacked resources on its territory, what could have been offered in return? The most obvious exception is pottery, although such a sample, while significant, are anecdotal and easily identifiable. In our opinion, it would be more interesting to examine the role of Dilmun as an intermediary in trade with Mesopotamia, following the model that is well documented for the 3rd millennium BC. If Dilmun retained this function during the 1st millennium BC, some conclusions from the Mesopotamian materials found on the Oman Peninsula might have to be revised. This would not, of course, mean that the Magan had no direct relations with Mesopotamia, but the intermediary role of Bahrain is a significant factor about which we unfortunately know very little for this period. Partly because there are no writing sources reporting these vicissitudes of interregional trade. Despite this fact and their geographical proximity, the political and social history of Dilmun and Magan developed independently of each other. Can we conclude from this that Bahrain merely imported objects and raw materials? What role did it actually play in this trade? What is still a mediator between the two ends of the Gulf? Can we confirm that Bahrain served as a middleman for materials from more distant regions such as Mesopotamia, for example? As you can see, we have extensive information about what came from the regions associated with the Oman Peninsula, but almost no certainly about what was exchanged in return. It seems obvious that the Omani Peninsula must have contributed something, as this exchange was reciprocal. As there is no compelling evidence for the use of means of payment at this time, these relationships must be interpreted as barter of one item for another. Did the Oman Peninsula only export copper and soft stone? Perhaps more, given the information from Mesopotamian documents such as the famous Magan wood. Can be ultimately considered this phenomenon as trade or merely barter? Many questions remain unanswered, and we hope that future research will shed light on these issues. Thank you. Merci.